What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Chris, Fedor, cleveland.com Cavs beat reporter, and Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist. And we're coming to you guys after the Cavs loss in Game 3 of the Eastern Conference first round, 126-104 to the Toronto Raptors. And guys, I want to start where this all began because I don't feel like we need to overreact. It's just one game, but there are areas for concern. So let's start with the turnovers because to me, that's where the game really begins. 22 turnovers. And when you dig a little bit deeper into that, it's not just the turnovers, it's the turnover rate. 23.4%, which is the Cavs' highest of the entire season. For context, the next highest was 21.9% back in January against Charlotte. So this wasn't just a bad night, guys. This was to an extreme of poor play. It felt like Toronto was dictating where Cleveland could go, shrinking driving lanes, and forcing them into decisions they simply didn't want to make. You saw guys picking up their dribble with nowhere to go. Passes that were a beat late, reads that just weren't clean, and it almost is unheard of James Harden having 8 turnovers. And the thing about those turnovers in a playoff game, especially against this Toronto Raptors team, they don't end your possession. They feed into the other team's energy. They also, in Scotiabank Arena, got the crowd going. So instead of Cleveland just playing into their offense, it felt like they were just trying to survive, which is something that we haven't really said about this Cavs offense since James Harden has been here. So when you watched that, did it feel more like Cleveland was just playing sloppy, or did it feel like Toronto created that with their physicality and defensive approach?
I'll give the same answer that James Harden gave after the game. It's both. It's definitely both. And look, the Cavs were not a high turnover team during the regular season, but in this series against the Raptors, they are. So part of that has to be their defense, their physicality, their length, their athleticism, the strategies that they were using defensively. We talked about it on the podcast last night. Are they just going to leave guys and dare them to shoot? Answer, yes. We talked about it on the podcast last night. Are they going to send multiple guys at Donovan Mitchell and James Harden at various points? Answer, yes. Scotty Barnes was in deny coverage a lot. They top locked more frequently than they did in the first 2 games, although top locking shouldn't be checkmate in a game of chess. It's a pretty common thing that a lot of teams do. I don't think it should cause the Cavs to be like, what do we do with this? How do we combat this? Because a lot of teams do it. But there are only 2 teams in the NBA playoffs that have committed more turnovers than the Cavs have. And it's Detroit and it's Phoenix. And it's surprising because you have Donovan Mitchell, you have James Harden, you have caretakers of your offense. But I do think stylistically, the Raptors have done some things that have been smart, and they have the kinds of players that can be disruptive to the Cavs on the offensive end of the floor. And I do think you have seen that from time to time throughout the course of this series.
Yeah, they're junking up the space. This was as best we can, we're going to try to make the Cavs role players beat us. That was the idea for this game from Toronto. And part of the answer was they couldn't, although Jalen Tyson and Max Strus both had nice games shooting the ball. Part of the answer was the Cavs were a little too willing to play that game. The word force came up 1,000 times in the post game.
22.
Just short of 1,000. But one of the most notable places I heard is when Donovan said, talking about him and James, how they reacted to the top blocking and how they reacted to some of the Raptors' off-ball physicality. You can make a decision for that not to impact you. Mental toughness is like a buzzword, and it's applicable to this team in many different respects. And this could even be a physical toughness thing because, like, the Raptors hit you with this all-out, we're blitzing you, we're following you up the court. Scotty Barnes scores a bucket. He turns around and it looks right at Donovan or James. He's right there in your face. You catch the ball. He's right up on you. You have to work really hard to get past him to get space. Like, that stuff wears on you mentally and physically. Some of it's understandable. Scotty Barnes is a freak athlete. And what he was able to, he was by far the best player on the court tonight, which should never happen in this series. But my God, he was incredible. The way he was able to because he has to work hard for his points too. And the way he was able to do that and make Donovan / James's life as hard as it was, it is just incredible. But that stuff wears on you, and you saw it over the course of this game. In the fourth quarter, Donovan and James, 83-81 going into the fourth quarter. Despite everything, despite 22 turnovers, despite a bad shooting night, like, the Cavs were in this game, and I'm thinking down the stretch, like, okay, this is where Donovan and James are going to separate themselves. If this game remains close with like 5 minutes left, we're going to see what playoff mastery looks like. And instead, these dudes didn't have it tonight. They scored, I think it was 9 points on 10 shots in the fourth quarter. And I think that has a lot to do with all the work that Toronto made them do over the course of this game. I really think that concerns that we had about this team being able to withstand the all-out pressure and the pace that Toronto was bringing to, this was the most that Toronto has made the Cavs feel them, and the Cavs did not respond well to that in this game.
I agree. And I want to kind of break these things down, in particular, the different areas that we've already touched on, because I think we have to separate what was kind of an anomaly in the Toronto Raptors shooting 60.9% from three rather than what is transferable to the remainder of this series. And obviously, you guys mentioned it, the Cavs shooting so heavily and being forced to kind of take these shots or them as clean, open looks and having to understand that 45 3-point attempts is a lot, but maybe those were the best looks. Obviously, tonight, it might have not been that case. They made just 14. That's 31.1%. And here's where I think it's interesting because a lot of those shots, like I said, were open. So at the same time, that's exactly what Toronto was trying to play them into. And we talked about this on a recent podcast. So the question becomes, are you taking good shots or are you playing into the defense? Because once those shots stop falling, and we've seen this all season, and I mentioned it before we got into the postseason, that when the Cavs shoot 34% from three, their offense and chances of winning look completely different. So how do you handle that in a playoff game, especially if you're known for your 3-point shooting? If the defense is giving you those looks, do you keep trusting it, or is there a point where you have to shift the approach and try and generate something else?
Yeah, I think all these are valid points, but I don't think we can ignore the fact that the Toronto Raptors made more than 60% from 3-point range on more than 20 3-point attempts. And over the course of NBA history, NBA playoff history, when that has happened, the team wins every single time. That team is undefeated. So we talked about it on previous podcasts, guys, that if the Raptors were going to be competitive, if they were going to win a game in the series, they would need something from an outlier perspective to happen. They got it. The 3-point shooting that they had tonight is an outlier for a team like the Raptors. And there just wasn't a lot that the Cavs were going to do to combat that. It's never been done in playoff history, winning a game when you're on that wrong side, when it's that drastic for a team like the Raptors. The Cavs also had an outlier performance when it came to turnovers. Yes, they've been a high turnover team so far in these playoffs. Yes, only 2 teams have committed more turnovers than them so far in the playoffs, but this is the most that they've had all season long. That's an outlier performance. James Harden, Donovan Mitchell combining for 33 points. That's an outlier performance. You know, playoff career highs for Scotty Barnes and RJ Barrett. By definition, those are outlier performances. So I think you had a bunch of outlier performances coming together on one night, and the Raptors deserve all the credit in the world for the way that they played tonight. It was maybe the best game that they've played all season long, given the stakes, given the opponent, given that they were down 2-0 in the series. They looked like a different team. They carried themselves like a different team. They strutted around like a different team, and they earned an opportunity to do that. Because when they needed to play their best to avoid going down 3-0, they were able to do that. And sometimes you just have to tip your cap to the other team. And I think that's one of the situations that the Cavs were looking at following the game. Yeah, they were looking at the things that they did wrong. Yeah, they were looking at some of the things that they can do better moving forward in this series. But they were also looking at it saying, Toronto did everything that they needed to do to get this win. And sometimes you just have to credit your opponent.
That being said, the force conversation They punched us. We didn't handle it well. They wore us down. That is not an outlier. We've heard that for 3-4 years now. That encapsulates so much about a game. The Cavs didn't shoot well from three either, right? They shot 31%, and some of those looks were pretty good, particularly in the fourth quarter. Thought they got some pretty good looks that they missed. But you know what happens when you get worn down for 3 quarters and then you get open looks? You don't have the legs. Like, some of these things are interconnected. The Raptors shooting threes, I don't know what to tell you. Scotty Barnes is shooting like 50+% from three. Probably more now. He was shooting 60 entering the game, and he made 3 more tonight. Like, I don't know what's happening there. Maybe the guy might just be a gamer. I can't tell you. The role players shoot better at home for sure. Is Jamison Battle going to have another 14-point quarter in his career in the playoffs? I'd bet against it. I don't know what's going on there. But I do think, like, not for this series, but like going forward, we need to address the conversation about, oh, they imposed their style on us. They wore us down over the course of this game. The Cavs are just a flat bad playoff road team. The entirety, other than 2 games in Miami last year when they played against the worst playoff team ever, the Cavs are a bad playoff road team. They're 2-9 since Donovan Mitchell got here. They have a negative 8.5 point differential. And that's, by the way, their 2 playoff road wins are both 20+ point wins. So it's probably actually the losses themselves, it's worse than that. When they lose, it's really freaking ugly when they lose. Beyond the series, you're going to have to, by definition, you're going to have to win road games to advance.
It is a question that they're going to have to answer. The whole thing about physicality, the whole thing about playing with force, aggressiveness, whatever term you want to use. I also thought it was really, really interesting. And I don't want to make too much about it, but I think there's at least a question to be asked about it. So as Donovan was talking in postgame, he said, quote, "I don't want to say timid." That term came up for a reason, right?
Who was sitting next to him when he said that?
Evan Mobley.
So again, like, sometimes you're searching for the right word and there's one word that comes to mind and it's not the one that you want to use. I know that I do that a lot on this podcast. I know that I do that when I write and then I have to kind of correct myself on the fly. So I don't want to make too big of a deal about it. But I also wonder, it makes me wonder, like, why that word? Was there something more to it? Was there a message that he was trying to send without actually using that word or coming across as if he wanted to use that word?
Was he counting the 120+ points in the paint that the Raptors have scored in the last 2 games? Was he replaying some Colin Murray Boyles buckets? The Cavs got bodied by a 6'7" forward playing center
A rookie.
in the paint tonight. A rookie as another clear career playoff high for you. Colin Murray Boyles with 22 on 11 of 15 shooting. Not a lot of jumpers in that mix. He's in there, and it's like he's throwing his shoulder into these dudes. He's just beating Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen at the rim straight up. As I've been saying, I think this kid's really good. But, like, you guys, Evan Mobley is, well, no longer the reigning defensive player of the year, but a one-time defensive player of the year. Jarrett Allen is consistently one of the best rim protectors in the NBA by opponent field goal percentage. The Cavs pay those dudes almost $70 million combined. They pay them each for different reasons. They both have many strengths, but they pay them both so that this doesn't happen.
You're right to question Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley when it comes to the force conversation. And obviously Donovan Mitchell saying the word timid with Evan Mobley sitting right next to him brings that to light. But I also don't think you have to look too far to question Donovan Mitchell and James Harden performances either, especially on the defensive end of the floor. Because we've talked about it, and we talked about it before the series even began, that opposing teams were going to attack them, knowing that they were the 2 quote-unquote weakest defenders on the opposing team, for the Cavs being on the defensive end of the floor. And I think Toronto going at them showcased that. We know they could lean on this. They put them into actions consistently. They made them work on every single possession, and you could see it build up as the game went on, right? Because we've talked about force on this podcast, but we also have talked about fatigue in the past, about how Donovan Mitchell and James Harden, especially when dealing with an offense that wants to go at you time and time again, how it makes your life not only harder defensively, but it also carries over to the offensive end of the floor. Because throughout the game, you could actually see guys jogging back, Donovan Mitchell, James Harden jogging back on defense, or taking a little longer to get into their sets, or settling into 3-point shots that we were talking about instead of attacking. Because I thought it was also interesting that the Cavs were not getting downhill, that the Cavs were not utilizing their strength of getting to the paint and putting 2 feet in. There was a large disparity between 2-point attempts between the Cavs and the Toronto Raptors in favor of Toronto because they understood what that created. And maybe they learned it from playing against the Cavs in the first 2 games of the series and how drive kick swings were so successful. Maybe that's part of the reason why they shot 60% from three. But I think the Cavs leaning into their fourth quarter offense and not necessarily having the legs necessary to contribute is that fatigue that they've been talking about. And something we thought conditioning ahead of the series, preparation throughout the season, or hoping it was just Indiana last year that made them look this tired. And that showed up once again. And when your two primary creators in James Harden and Donovan Mitchell, two potential future Hall of Famers, are dealing with that at the same time, everything else starts to break down around them. And those role players that we thought were going to swing series, well, they become do or die time. And they just simply didn't show up enough in tonight's game.
It kind of felt like a reverse of games 1 and 2 in the sense of the Raptors had to work so hard offensively in games 1 and 2, and Brandon Ingram had to work so hard offensively that he just looked exhausted and he looked defeated and he looked frustrated and he looked annoyed. And the same thing with some of the other Raptors guys, because when you have to work that hard offensively, you don't want to work that hard, and you just take whatever you think is the easiest path to trying to get a shot at the rim. It felt like at times the Cavs were like, you know what? I don't even want to bother trying to run around this screen because I'm just going to get banged. Or I don't even want to bother driving to the basket because I know that I'm going to see multiple bodies that are in my way. And we haven't seen that as much from the Cavs in the second half of the season since James Harden got here. But when Toronto made them work to generate quality offense, it looked like they just didn't have the same commitment level to doing that. And I think part of the reason why they took more than half of their shots from 3-point range is because that was just easier. That was easier than fighting through screens. That was easier than driving to the basket. That was easier than having to work in isolation against Scotty Barnes. It was just like the path of least resistance for them offensively tonight was to kind of settle or to get Dean Wade open looks or to get Jalen Tyson open looks or to get whoever it was open looks, because James had to work so hard offensively and Donovan had to work so hard offensively, and Dennis Schroeder couldn't do anything on the offensive end of the floor, so much so that he got benched in the second half of this game. So I do think those are questions that the Cavs are going to have to continue to answer. And I do think when they run into that wall and teams take away the thing that they want to do most and the free-flowing, fluid offense, what's your counter to that? And are you willing to work through that? Are you willing to continue to fight for quality looks over and over and over again? Or are you just going to take, like I said, the path of least resistance? So from that standpoint, they have to answer that question. The other thing that I thought the Raptors did, more so than the first 2 games, they matchup hunted. That was clear. One of the funniest things being in the arena, and I'm not sure if you guys could see this on TV, but Garrett Temple was hilarious tonight. He was up. He looked like Darko. He was up, and every single time that James Harden was on the floor, like Garrett Temple was directing traffic with his arm, saying, get James in every single screening action to force him to switch and then just go at him. And he did the same thing when Max Strus was on the floor. He would wave guys off and then he would wave other guys to that screen, because the goal for the Raptors was, can we get Max in the action? Can we get James in the action? And notice that they didn't consistently run their offense through Brandon Ingram over and over and over again, because they learned in the first 2 games that's probably not the best approach. Maybe we don't want to go at the best defender, the best perimeter defender that the Cavs have. So I do think we asked the question about, hey, do the Raptors even have the skilled guys that can take advantage of the defensive limitations of Max Strus and of James Harden? Tonight they did.
That's going to be a recurring theme now, particularly with Harden. is double-edged. That's another thing that has residual effects at the other end. It's not just make James work to get the ball on offense or make him work to get shots. By the way, Donovan and James, okay, you have to work hard on offense. That's what you guys get paid to do. I'm sorry it was harder tonight. You don't want them to have to work so hard, but that's like what they're there for. They're there to bail your offense out when it gets hard. This is the exact kind of game. I'll say it again, 83-81 in the fourth quarter. You get there, you have those dudes, you're feeling okay. It's not all on them. It's not fair because the Raptors legit sold out at times to make sure that they weren't going to get shots off, but it's their job to problem solve. They're both like the playoff chess masters. Like you got to work with what you got. You got to work with what you got to a certain extent. But yeah, the Raptors are going to be hunting you now. The rest of the series, the Cavs have to. It was ironic actually that Kenny was praising James before the game as like he's the best rester that Kenny has ever seen. Kenny watched some 2018 LeBron clips. You might feel differently.
Compared him to Messi.
There you go. It's harder to make Messi play defense, is what I would say in retort to that. But that's going to keep happening now. The Raptors are also going to throw more random traps. Like, the stop blocking, this stuff's not going away. You're going to have to figure it out. And part of figuring it out is going to have to, like, your role players are going to just have to make more shots. And that's another red flag that the Raptors raised to another. It's all one game. It's all one game right now. Cavs role players, by and large, have been pretty good for parts of this year. I think the Jalen Tyson stuff tonight, super duper encouraging. Him knocking down shots, him making plays, get 4 assists tonight. They're going to need him later in the playoffs. This is like, tonight was, given everything that he's been through, having his role reduced and having the injury, it was like, I was very concerned he was going to lose his rhythm and that Kenny was going to lose trust in him over time. I know Kenny was screaming from the rooftops, it's going to happen for him. It's going to happen for him. That kind of made me believe that, like, Kenny felt like Jalen needed to hear that, made me worried a little bit. Jalen was great tonight. That was important. But Keon Ellis is doing cardio in this series. He's got 3 points and 7 rebounds in 3 games. That's not cutting. And he's not big enough to guard some of the guys that the Cavs would like him to guard. Boy, the hook for Dean Wade was quicker than I anticipated. He played 10 second-half minutes. That took me back. Dennis Schroeder, I know why the Cavs like him. I believe in the championship equity credibility stuff that Chris wrote about in his story this week on Dennis. I do. I think Dennis, like, has a place on a playoff roster and can make an impact. But, like, when he's out there with James and Donovan, I'm really, like, other than giving them a break, which again is valuable, what's he out there doing? He fights on defense. Okay, he's like $170, like him and Keon both. You can fight all you want. You could be as active as you want. Eventually, like, the laws of science take over there. You know what I mean? How about Sam Merrill? The Sam Merrill wrist stuff. Yeah, I have never seen Sam Merrill miss a good look as badly as he missed that 3. I think it was for the left win with like 5.5 minutes left in the third quarter. And it's not just that Sam Merrill he's playing probably about 5 minutes less per game in the playoffs than he has in the regular season. He's shooting less than half as many 3-point attempts. Sam Merrill's passing up shots. That can't happen. I don't know how serious the wrist injury is. I saw he had it, like, sort of taped up.
He's had it taped up for basically the second half of the season at this point.
Right. But I wonder how much better this is going to get. And I wonder if he can figure out how to shoot with it again, because the Cavs losing he was the second on the team in 3-point makes behind Donovan. He's, as far as pure role player shooter, he's their best one. It would be a huge dent in what they're trying to do offensively if Sam can't figure this thing out with the wrist.
Another night where he left the locker room with a huge bag of ice on his hand/wrist.
It's not ideal in any situation, especially for someone who's renowned as a shooter. And the Cavs need his spacing, need his gravity. And if the Toronto Raptors don't necessarily have to look at him the same way, well, now you're having a different conversation. But guys, I do think that also leans back into the conversation I was having earlier about the rim attempts for the Cavs, the rim attempts for the Toronto Raptors, which was astronomically high for the Toronto Raptors, who I believe were getting up to the 83rd percentile in attempts at the rim, but just the 5th percentile in rim field goal percentage. So even if they weren't making them, they were getting there. And conversely, obviously, we know the Cleveland Cavaliers were taking shots. So my thought process, especially at halftime, when Brandon Ingram has 4 fouls and Scotty Barnes has 4 fouls, is, oh, surely the Cavs are going to change their mindset and attack these guys off the dribble, especially if you have Donovan Mitchell and James Harden's capabilities, right? That simply wasn't the case. Even Donovan Mitchell, 7 of his 16 shots came from three, and he only made one of those. So I'm curious to get your thought process, guys. When a team is clearly trying to wear down your stars like they were on the defensive end of the floor, and you aren't able to do the same to the opposing team's stars, what's the counter? Is that on the rotations, the usage, or do you need other guys to step in and take pressure off them? And obviously, with Kenny Atkinson saying all year that he's believed in this depth, who could it be? Because if Dennis Schroeder is not stepping up in the capability that you want, if Keon Ellis isn't doing what you want, to Jimmy's point, if Dean Wade is getting 10 second half minutes, a guy who the Cavs locker room could not say enough praise about after game two. I'm curious to get your thoughts on all of it.
I thought it was pretty striking that the Raptors took 56 shots in the paint compared to 32 for the Cavs. That is a drastic difference, especially in a series where you feel like, generally, Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley should have an advantage inside. Now, totally understand that Jarrett is not somebody who's going to create offense for himself. He's reliant on James and Donovan to get him the ball. Totally understand that Evan Mobley has had games like tonight throughout the course of the regular season. It's part of the reason why people were trying to pull more out of Evan, more consistency out of Evan. But that's a huge disparity. It is a huge disparity that shouldn't be the way that it is. And the other thing is, this defense is built to protect the paint and protect the rim. And it's like, if you're going to give up a bunch of threes, but the trade-off is you keep them out of the paint, you keep them away from the rim, okay, then you feel like the defensive plan and the execution of that plan is logical. But the last thing that you want when you go into a playoff series or into a playoff game is give up everything. You pick and choose. You're supposed to pick and choose. Okay, if we're going to protect the paint, that's what we're going to do. That's how our defense is built. And that's just going to lend itself to open threes. Probably more open than what we would normally want. But it's okay because we're protecting the paint and we're protecting the rim. To give up the amount of made threes that the Cavs gave up, and to give up the amount of made shots in the paint, you just can't do that. You did nothing of what you wanted to do on the defensive end of the floor. And then offensively, again, I know Evan didn't have it. It was not a good night for Evan, but that should be a pathway. Theoretically, that should be a pathway to offensive success when the teams are hounding Donovan Mitchell and James Harden and making things more difficult on them. That's why it's called whatever it's called. The Core Four, the new Core Four, the Fantastic Four, the Fabulous Four, whatever you want to call it. You know what I'm saying? And if Donovan and James are going to have to work that hard and they're going to command that much attention from the opposing defense, then Evan, you better step up. And Jarrett Allen, you better step up and you better play better than you did tonight. And the fact that they didn't, again, just one game, we're only talking about game 3, but we've seen this too many times from these guys in a playoff environment. James and Donovan, at times throughout the course of this run, are going to need help. They're going to need a different outlet for offensive success than what it is that they generate. And that's where Evan, I'm not going to call out Dean because that's not his role. That's not who he is. But the guys who are capable of it, who are in that role, they have to deliver in a different kind of way. So for me, yeah, I mean, you could look at Sam. Yeah, you could look at some of these other guys coming off the bench. I'm going to look at Evan Mobley and I'm going to look at Jarrett Allen and say, you've got to give more than what you did tonight, especially in terms of what the paint disparity was between these two teams.
I agree with you, Chris, and I think it's very, very important what you're saying. And Jimmy, I'm going to say this really quickly so you can jump in. Jarrett Allen was 5 of 7 from the field, right? I think he needs to get more touches. Maybe James Harden, 8 turnovers. Maybe some of those passes were meant to go to Jarrett Allen, right? But we know the connectivity between Jarrett Allen's offensive engagement and his defensive productivity. I think the Cavs need to rely on that. Kenny Atkinson continues to say, I did not know how impactful, how important, how meaningful Jarrett Allen is going to be for this team. Well, it's game 3 of the postseason. I hope you figured it out. I hope you realized it. 5 of 7 from the field. Good looks. If Evan Mobley's not going to do it, because Evan Mobley took 13 shots tonight, I believe. If Evan Mobley's not going to do it, then it has to shift it to Jarrett Allen. Jarrett, I'm sorry. I know you're dealing with the knee tendonitis and all this. If you're the person that they have to go to, then they have to go to him. And they have to trust that he's going to be able to come through. They can't just wait and hope and think, Evan Mobley's going to come around sometime.
There's another way that Jarrett can get his shot attempts up. He can go get an offensive rebound and get a shot attempt that way. It is possible. He had one tonight, one offensive rebound. For somebody that has the kind of advantage that he does from a size, bulk, physicality standpoint, go get the ball. Go get yourself involved a different kind of way.
Again, particularly when the Raptors' only real center played, 8 second-half minutes for Jakob Poeltl. So that means the guy who's boxing you out, more likely than not, most of the time is either 6'7" rookie Colin Murray Boyles or Mahmoud. I like your chances. I like your chances against either of those guys fighting for rebounds. And I agree that it's a little bit on them. I think it's on everybody per usual. I think it's a little bit on them because they need to be able to do that, especially when Toronto is scheming in a way that makes it harder to get them the ball organically, right? The Cavs, it's hard for Donovan and James. They're whether it's Scotty's arms all in their face or two guys' arms all in their face, whatever's happening, they see somebody open behind the three-point line. Their modern NBA brain goes, boom, we've got it. This is what you play for in 2026. Let's get this open three. I'm not going to fault them for making that past the turnovers. Yeah, you got to clean those up. But this is not, they're not just sitting back there dribbling it out. And they don't have time to make these decisions. This is a hectic situation that they're in, and they're finding what's available to them. That being said, Evan Mobley 4 of 13 in that environment, and Toronto's going small. That's just bad. That's just not good enough. Jarrett Allen 7 shots. That's just not good enough. And that now we're talking to everybody here. Figure a way around it. Watch it back, because if there's two guys going at you, you swing the ball over. Now maybe that person doesn't necessarily have to take that shot. Maybe they can find an avenue to get the ball down low real quick.
Sometimes it's interesting because as the game's unfolding, I sit there and I watch and I say to myself, I wonder if Evan just needs to force stuff. It might be a bad shot, and maybe it's not part of his profile, but just force the action a different kind of way. He's so wired to consistently make the right play over and over and over again. He had 7 assists, and I give him credit for that. He was making some really nice plays when the defense was converging on him. But sometimes I just wonder if it sets a different kind of tone. If he's just going to force the action a little bit more. There's that word again. I don't want to use Donovan's word and Evan's word and Kenny Atkinson's word and James Harden's word, but 13 shot attempts, that's fine. He also got 8 free throws. He worked his way to the line. But the first 2 games kind of showed him that this can be a series where he dominates. Not be the third option offensively, but be kind of like a co-star, like right there with James Harden and Donovan Mitchell. And the fact that, coming from game 2, the success that he had there to game 3, to have this kind of game, to borrow Donovan's phrase, where it looked like Evan was a little bit more timid, that's disappointing from a Cavs perspective.
Well, guys, now we look at game 4, and I think the key is not overreacting, but also not ignoring what we just saw. Toronto shooting 60.9% from 3. That's probably not going to happen again. But the turnovers, the paint pressure, the defensive strategy, the way they wore Cleveland down, those things are repeatable. And now Toronto has confidence in that approach. So for Cleveland, it's just not about playing better, because obviously they're going to say they're going to play better. It's about showing that they have the answers to actually make adjustments. So when you guys are watching game 4, what's the first thing you're looking for that tells you Cleveland actually adjusted? And I'm not just talking about emotionally, but I'm talking about structurally. because game 3 didn't decide this series as much as some Toronto fans might think that they're going to come back and get 2-2 and then go back to Cleveland and use this all as momentum. We already know each game in the postseason is its own entity, but it definitely showed how this series can be decided if the Cavs do not make an adjustment.
First of all, I think Toronto fans have a right to feel that way after the way that their home team performed for them tonight. It was a great performance by their team. It breathed life into the series. It resuscitated Toronto's upset hopes. It showed them a potential pathway to success. Now, yes, part of that pathway was outlier stuff, but it's certainly more than what they had after the first 2 games of this series, where it's like, oh my God, what are we going to do? So Toronto was great tonight, and they deserve a ton of credit. And I think for me, it's just how do the Cavs handle the physicality and the ball pressure that the Raptors are going to bring in Game 4? It's not a situation where the Raptors win one game, they're like, all right, cool. No, it's their job to try and even up this series as best they can. So, in the words of Kenny Atkinson, Toronto's gonna bring it from the very beginning. Toronto's going to try and put the Cavs on their heels. Tonight they did, all night long. They're going to try and do it again. How do the Cavs handle that? How do they handle the environment? How do they handle physicality? How do they handle the relentless ball pressure that Toronto brings? Can the Cavs take better care of the ball? I think that's a big part of this thing for the Cavs, because turnovers fuel the Toronto offense, and they have throughout the course of the regular season. And it really got them going offensively. It got the crowd into it. So to me, that would be step 1 for the Cavs, is to limit the amount of turnovers, the live ball turnovers, and just show that they can handle the physicality and the pressure, the ball pressure, that Toronto is going to once again try and put on them.
How about applying a little more of your own? I think this is like a chicken or the egg thing, where like the Raptors were getting stopped at causing turnovers, so the Raptors only committed 11 tonight. They took care of the ball. And as much as we want to look at Evan and Jarrett, like, come on, guys, like you guys are the rim protectors. You're what this defense is built around. Like some a lot has to go wrong for them to be involved in the play, right? Like stuff has to go wrong before that point. And some of their again, Colin Murray-Boyle was bodying them at times, and that's not okay. But some of the time, what was going on here is like Evan and Jarrett were playing this, one or both of them were playing this cat and mouse game where it's like, okay, the ball handler's in the paint and I don't want them to get to the rim, but I also know I have someone behind me. And if I come out too far, then they're gonna throw a bounce pass or behind me or a lob over my head, or you can get a dunk. And it's just like their job is really hard. Again, like with Donovan Mitchell and James Harden, that's what you get paid for, to do difficult defensive things. Sometimes you have to ask the defensive player of the year to guard 2 players at once. Hard job, your job, right? Jarrett Allen, kind of the same thing. It's not your first rodeo. Like you guys, when you guys are defending pick and rolls, that is your job. Someone comes around a screen, you keep them at bay without giving up a dunk over your head. Hard job. That's why big men are so important. That's why big men win most defensive player of the year awards. That's just how this works. So I'm watching the defense. I'm watching the defense as much as we are watching the offense, because you can go both ways there. You don't just have to the offense bleeding over into the defense, another tired narrative for the guy. It doesn't have to be that way. You can lock in and make offense easier by getting stops.
I agree. And to that point, guys, I think let's end on a positive.
There was one?
Well, it's kind of tied in, but Jalen Tyson and Jordan Tyson became the first brother duo to go first rounds in an NBA and NFL draft. That's the positive. But as Jordan and Jalen Tyson will tell you, that after draft day, the work begins. And the Cavs and Jalen Tyson need to get back on the saddle and figure out what they need to do to take home Game 4 and then head home to Rocket Arena.
We had to bring in a different sport to find the positive in this game.
By the way, Jimmy, to your point about defense, that was the 3rd worst performance defensively for the Cavs all season. The only 2 that were worse than that were 2 games against the Orlando Magic.
And we already know that Scotty Barnes and the Toronto Raptors are going to come out firing.
Man, Scotty was so good.
Scotty Barnes, after the game, said, "We want this so bad." You could hear the emotion through Scotiabank Arena. You could hear the emotion in Scotty Barnes' voice, just the physicality, the force, everything that they're going to try and bring and replicate from Game 3 into Game 4. But we'll have to wait until then to see how the Cavs respond. That's been the big word for the Cavs all season, response. Now it's time to show that they can actually do that on the playoff stage. But with all that being said, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word STOP. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around, because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.